She was fired for being 4 minutes late in a storm. No one knew the man she'd stopped to help that same night was the one signing her manager's paycheck. He said nothing when she opened his car door. He said nothing when he watched her get written up on a delivery app screen. But 3 days later, he walked into that office, and the first thing he asked for was her name. Before you go any further, if stories like this hit something in you, tap subscribe now. It costs nothing, and it tells me to keep finding people like her. Okay, let's begin. Rain hit the windshield of Elena Cruz's 10-year-old hatchback like it had somewhere urgent to be. 9:47 p.m., a Tuesday in early March, the kind of cold that got into your knuckles and stayed there. Her wipers were on the highest setting and still losing the argument. 6 deliveries left on the app, 42 minutes to hit her bonus window. Her phone was propped against the dash, screen fogged at the edges, buzzing with a new order notification every time she thought she'd caught up. She hadn't eaten since noon. A granola bar, eaten one-handed at a red light. She hadn't sat down since 4 that afternoon. Elena was 31. She'd been driving for Swift Run Delivery for 2 years, ever since the daycare center she used to manage lost its lease and never reopened. Before that, she'd had weekends. She'd had a schedule that looked the same from one Tuesday to the next. Now her life ran on an algorithm that rewarded speed and punished almost everything else, including hesitation. She kept a photo of her son taped to the visor. Mateo, 7 years old, gap-toothed, holding up a paper trophy from his class spelling bee. Underneath it, in her own handwriting, on a strip of masking tape, she'd written herself a note months ago. 4 more months. That's what it would take, if nothing went wrong, to save enough for the deposit on a real 2-bedroom apartment. Right now, Mateo slept on the pull-out couch in the living room of the 1-bedroom they shared, and every night she stepped over his shoes by the door and felt the 4 months stretch a little longer than it should. Her second-to-last stop before Route 9 was a house with its porch light off, no doorbell answered, just a text that read, "Leave it by the mat, thanks." 3 minutes after she'd already knocked twice, she left it by the mat. She didn't take it personally anymore. She'd learned in her first month that taking it personally was a luxury the job didn't budget for. Back in the car, heater blasting, fingers stiff on the wheel, she caught herself doing what she always did on the long stretches between drops, running the numbers in her head like a rosary. Rent due the 9th. Mateo's school fundraiser envelope still empty on the counter. 4 more months if nothing broke, if the car held out, if she didn't get sick, if the app kept sending enough orders to make the math work at all. She merged onto Route 9, the warehouse district, half-lit streetlights throwing orange smears across the wet asphalt. This stretch of road unsettled her even on dry nights. No foot traffic, chain-link fences, the kind of empty that made a person walk faster to their car. Tonight the rain made it worse, turned every reflection into something moving. She was 3 blocks from her next drop-off when she saw the flashers. A black sedan sat crooked on the shoulder, hazards blinking weak and slow, like the battery pushing them was already halfway gone. Steam curled up from under the hood in thin ropes, the rain kept trying to beat down flat. A man stood beside the car in a soaked overcoat, phone held up at an angle like he was chasing 1 bar of signal that kept slipping away. Elena checked the dash clock. 38 minutes left on the bonus window. If she stopped, she'd blow it. Maybe blow the whole night's earnings, if a late delivery tanked her rating on top of it. She had exactly enough gas to finish her route and get home. She did not have enough gas to be generous tonight, not by any math that made sense. She pulled over anyway. Some decisions don't ask permission from the math. "You good?" she called through the gap in her window. Rain needling sideways into the car, soaking her sleeve in seconds. "Battery, I think," the man said. His voice was even, tired, no edge to it. The voice of someone who'd been standing in the cold long enough to stop being frustrated about it. "Phone's dead too. 20 minutes out here, and not one car's stopped." "People don't stop on this stretch," Elena said. "Bad reputation." She was already popping her trunk, already digging past a spare tire and a flat of bottled water for the jumper cables she kept back there for exactly this. Not because she was unusually prepared, but because her own car had died on her twice last winter, and nobody had stopped for her either. She got both cars angled nose to nose in the dark without being asked twice, her hands numbing as she worked the clamps onto terminals slick with rain. The man held an umbrella over her the entire time she worked, even though it meant the wind kept driving rain into his own collar instead. "You didn't have to do that," she said, when his engine finally caught and turned over, headlights flaring back to life. "Neither did you," he said, and something in the way he said it made her look at him a beat longer than she meant to. Not flirtation. Recognition, maybe, like he was cataloging something about her he didn't expect to find on the side of a warehouse road at 10 at night. She didn't ask his name, he didn't ask hers. There wasn't time, and neither of them seemed like the type to force it. She coiled her cables, tossed them back in the trunk, and got back in her car. The clock read 31 minutes left, gone, along with any real shot at the bonus. She drove the rest of her route as fast as she safely could, hydroplaning once on a curve that made her stomach drop, delivering 4 bags of cooling takeout to 4 doors that opened just long enough for a hand to grab the food and a door to shut again. Nobody said thank you. Nobody was supposed to. That wasn't the job. She missed the bonus window by 4 minutes. Her manager, Doug Feldman, didn't care why. The Swift Run regional office smelled like burnt coffee and the particular staleness of a room that hadn't had its windows opened in a long time. Doug had Elena's delivery log pulled up on his monitor before she'd even gotten her jacket zipper all the way down. A spreadsheet of red and green cells, her entire month reduced to color coding. Sitting there, under fluorescent light like evidence in a trial she hadn't known she was standing. 4 minutes, Doug said, tapping the screen with one finger, not looking up. That's the 3rd late completion this quarter. There was a man stranded on Route 9, Elena said, still catching her breath from the walk-in. Dead battery, no signal, standing in the rain. I stopped to help him. That's not my problem, and it's not the algorithm's problem. Doug leaned back, arms crossing over a Swift Run branded fleece vest that had clearly never once been worn outside on an actual route. You know what this job is. You know what these numbers mean to corporate. I don't make the thresholds, Elena. I just have to hit them. I know what a stranded person in the rain means, Elena said, quieter now, not because she wasn't sure of herself, but because she'd learned a long time ago that raising her voice in this office never once changed an outcome. Doug exhaled through his nose, the sound of a man who considered himself patient. You want to keep this job, you start acting like everyone else out there. Heads down, don't stop for anything that isn't on the app. That's not me being cold. That's me trying to keep you employed. He slid a printed write-up across the desk, already filled out, her name already typed in the header, like the outcome had never been in question. 1 more infraction this quarter and you're done. I mean it this time. I've got 6 people who'd take this route without blinking. Elena read the write-up once. 3 prior incidents listed, none of them longer than 90 seconds past window. All of them the kind of gap a red light or a jammed elevator could account for. This one, she said, tapping the second line, was a train crossing. I sat there for 2 minutes because a freight train doesn't care about my delivery window. I'm not disputing the reasons, Doug said. I'm telling you corporate doesn't read reasons. They read the color of the cell. Then what's the point of even having a reason? There isn't one, Doug said, and for just a second, something almost like an apology moved through his face before it hardened back into policy. That's not me being cruel, Elena. That's just what the job is now. It's what it's been since they put the app in charge of things people used to just use their judgment on. She thought about arguing the specifics further. She thought better of it. Arguing never once changed a number on a spreadsheet, not in 2 years of trying. She signed it. She folded the paper and slid it into her bag, right next to the photo strip with Mateo's spelling trophy, and went back out into the rain, because her shift wasn't over, and there were still 3 deliveries left on her app that didn't care what had just happened in that office. Priya Nair caught her in the parking lot on the way to her car, 2 coffees in hand, one already held out toward Elena before she'd even said hello. Priya had been driving Swift Run's North routes for a year and a half. Ever since she'd finished nursing prerequisites, she still hadn't found a way to afford the next step of. You look like you got yelled at, Priya said. Written up, Elena said, taking the coffee, because refusing it would have taken more energy than she had left. 4th one this quarter. Well, 3rd that counted. This one's the one that finishes me off, if it happens again. For what? Stop to help a guy with a dead battery. Miss the bonus window by 4 minutes. Priya was quiet for a second. The kind of quiet that meant she was deciding whether to say what she actually thought, or the version that was easier to hear. For what it's worth, she finally said, I wouldn't have stopped, and I hate that about myself a little. Don't, Elena said. I don't feel like a hero. I feel like an idiot who's 4 months further from a real apartment for my kid. Maybe, Priya said. Or maybe you're just the only one of us who hasn't let the app finish training the decency out of her yet. She squeezed Elena's arm once, quick, and got into her own car before either of them had to sit any longer in how true that felt. Elena didn't mention the sedan again after that, not to her sister, who called that night to ask how work was and got a flat fine in return, and not to anyone else on the floor the next morning. It didn't feel like the kind of thing that mattered to anyone but her, a stranger she'd never see again, in exchange for a bonus she desperately needed. It felt, if she was honest with herself at 2 a.m, listening to Mateo breathe on the pull-out couch 6 feet away, like the kind of trade only fools kept making, and she fell asleep still not entirely sure she regretted it. 3 days passed in the ordinary grinding way. Days pass when you're 4 minutes away from losing a job you can't afford to lose. Elena hit every window. On the 2nd day, an elderly man dropped his grocery bag 2 doors down from a delivery stop, oranges rolling into the gutter, and she felt her foot ease off the gas for half a second before she made herself press back down. On the 3rd day, she heard a kid crying behind a locked apartment door while she left food on the neighboring mat, and she made herself knock on the building super's door instead of the apartment itself, reported it, and drove away before she could see whether anyone answered. She told herself this was what surviving looked like. She told herself Mateo's spelling trophy and the note on her visor mattered more than a stranger's dead battery, more than an old man's oranges, more than a kid she'd probably imagined the worst about anyway. She mostly believed it. Mostly. At home, the math kept not quite working, no matter how many times she ran it. Mateo needed new shoes before the school year's spring assembly. His current ones had a sole starting to peel at the toe, and he'd taken to walking on the outside edge of his foot to hide it, a habit she'd caught him practicing in front of the hallway mirror like it was choreography. She'd priced a pair at the outlet store, $31, on sale. She had it. She just didn't have it. And the electric bill, and the extra 100 she was trying to set aside every week toward the 4-month note on her visor, not in the same week. That night, after his homework was done and spread across the kitchen table in his careful, slightly too large handwriting, Mateo asked her, out of nowhere, whether she'd ever helped a stranger before. She looked up from the bills she was sorting, startled by the question. "Why do you ask that?" "We're doing a unit on kindness," he said, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. "Miss Alvarez says everybody has a story." Elena thought about the sedan, the umbrella, the 4 minutes. "I helped somebody once," she said carefully. "Cost me a little, but I don't think I'd take it back." "Would you do it again?" She looked at her son's careful handwriting, at the shoes with the peeling sole tucked by the door, at the note on her visor, visible through the window, if she craned her neck. "Yeah," she said, surprising herself with how sure it came out. "I think I would." He nodded like that settled something, satisfied in the particular way 7-year-olds are satisfied by a straight answer, and went back to his worksheet without another word. On the 4th day, a man in a gray overcoat walked into the Swift Run regional office and asked the receptionist for Doug Feldman. Doug came out of his office smiling the particular smile he reserved for anyone who might represent money. Corporate auditors, potential investors, anyone whose opinion of him traveled upward instead of down. "Mr. Whitmore, I wasn't expecting you until next week." "Change of plans," the man said, shaking rain off his umbrella by the door. "I wanted to walk the branch floor before the acquisition paperwork finalizes. See how things actually run, not just how they look on a slide deck." Elena was in the back room at that exact moment, clocking out early after a double shift that had left her hands aching from gripping a steering wheel for 11 hours straight. She heard the name through the thin office wall, Whitmore, and didn't think much of it. Corporate names came and went through this office like weather. She grabbed her jacket off the hook and rounded the corner toward the exit. And stopped. The overcoat, the even, tired voice, clearer now without rain drowning half of it. The man from Route 9, standing 10 feet away in a hallway that smelled like burnt coffee, looking directly at her, like a fact had just clicked into place he'd been waiting 3 days to confirm. "You're the driver who stopped for me," Richard Whitmore said. The office went quiet, in the specific way a room goes quiet, when everyone in it suddenly understands they're witnessing something they weren't supposed to see yet. 2 other drivers, Marcus and a woman Elena only knew by her first name, Bethany, had been filing paperwork at the front counter and now stood frozen mid-motion, watching. Priya had come in for her afternoon shift 5 minutes earlier and hadn't made it past the doorway. Doug's smile stayed frozen on his face, uncertain which direction this was about to break. "I didn't realize you two had already met," Doug said carefully, the words coming out slower than he meant them to. "We hadn't been introduced," Richard said, still looking at Elena. "She never told me her name that night. I never told her mine. I've spent 3 days trying to track down the driver who stopped on Route 9 in a storm to help a total stranger, knowing full well it would cost her something. This morning I finally traced it through the delivery logs from that route and that time window. There were exactly 2 drivers active. One of them was you." Doug's face had gone the color of the printer paper stacked on his desk. "Sir, if there's been any issue with how a particular driver was handled, I can assure you." "There has been an issue," Richard said, not raising his voice, which somehow made it land harder than if he had. "I pulled her personnel file this morning, before I came in, 3 write-ups this quarter. Every one of them for a delivery completed less than 2 minutes past window. Traffic, an elevator, the ordinary friction of a route through a city. Except the 4th one. 4 minutes, the night she stopped on an empty road to help a stranded stranger, instead of chasing a bonus she badly needed. Company policy sets those thresholds at the corporate level, Doug said, quieter now, the smile long gone. I don't have the authority to override. You had the authority to slide a write-up across a desk without asking a single question about why she was late, Richard said. You had the authority to threaten someone's job over 4 minutes. I'm having a hard time understanding why authority only seems to run in one direction in this branch. Doug didn't answer that. Marcus, by the front counter, had gone very still, the way people go still when they're watching a version of a conversation they've imagined having themselves for a long time. Then the policy is wrong, Richard said, and in 30 days, when this branch reports to me under the new ownership structure, it changes. He turned back to Elena, and for the first time since he'd walked in, something in his posture eased, like he'd been holding a question for 3 days and was finally setting it down. What's your name? Elena Cruz, she said, and heard how small her own voice sounded in a room this quiet. Elena, I'd like you to consider something other than a delivery route. He reached into his coat and held out a card, plain white, nothing flashy on it. I'm restructuring the logistics division of the company acquiring Swift Run's regional contracts. I need someone to run driver relations, someone who understands what the people actually doing this work need, because she's been one of them, not someone who's only ever looked at it from a spreadsheet. No pressure tonight. Take the card. Think about it. Call me when you're ready to talk, or don't call at all, and I'll understand that too. Elena looked down at the card, then up at Doug, who had suddenly found something urgent to study on his monitor, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he knew better than to say out loud in front of his new boss. You didn't have to do any of this, Elena said quietly to Richard, echoing, almost word for word, what she'd said to him 3 nights ago on the side of a dark road. Neither did you, he said. That's exactly why I'm doing it. Elena didn't quit that night. She finished clocking out, drove home through streets that were finally, mercifully dry, and sat at her kitchen table with Mateo asleep in the next room, turning the card over and over in her hands until almost 2 in the morning, running the numbers the way she always ran numbers. Rent, groceries, the 4 months note still taped to her visor, the risk of trading a job she understood, however badly it treated her, for one she didn't understand at all. She called Priya first, before anyone else, sitting on the edge of her bed with the phone against her ear and the card balanced on her knee. You're going to think I'm crazy, Elena said. Try me. She explained it all, the sedan, the storm, the write-up, the man in the overcoat who turned out to own the company that was about to own their branch. Priya was quiet long enough that Elena checked to see if the call had dropped. Elena, Priya finally said, you're not crazy. You're the only person on this floor who did the thing everyone else says they'd do if they were braver, and it's about to change your entire life. Take the card, call him, and if there's any way to bring the rest of us drivers with you when you go, do it. Start with the ones who've been eating this job's cruelty quietly the way you have. Elena called Richard Whitmore the next afternoon, during her lunch break, sitting in her car in a gas station parking lot, because it was the only quiet place she could find. She kept the conversation short, mostly questions about what the role would actually involve, careful the way she was careful about everything that touched Mateo's future. By the end of the call, she'd said yes to a start date 6 weeks out. Enough time, Richard said, for the acquisition paperwork to clear and for her to give proper notice if she wanted to. She gave proper notice. Doug didn't meet her eyes when she handed it to him. 6 weeks later, Doug Feldman was let go in the first wave of restructuring. Not out of revenge, Richard made a point of clarifying to the branch when it happened, but because an internal audit of the write-up history turned up a pattern across multiple drivers, not just Elena, of penalizing exactly the kind of judgment calls the company's own mission statement claimed, in writing, to value. The branch adopted a new policy within the month: no penalty for a delay caused by a driver assisting someone in an emergency situation, verified after the fact through a simple incident report. Somebody in HR, without asking Elena's permission first, started calling it the Route 9 policy, and the name stuck. Elena moved into a real 2-bedroom apartment 4 months ahead of the schedule she'd taped to her visor. Mateo got a bed with a headboard instead of a pull-out couch, and picked out the paint color himself. A blue he insisted was called Ocean, though the hardware store can just say cerulean. He also got the new shoes, full price this time, the week she signed the lease, and wore them to school without once thinking about how his soul used to peel. Priya was one of the first drivers Elena brought over when the new division opened its second hiring round 3 months later. Off the road entirely now, running scheduling for a team of 40, the nursing prerequisites finally within reach, on a salary that didn't require choosing between rent and shoes. Marcus followed a few weeks after that. Bethany stayed on as a driver but under the Route 9 policy, which by then had a laminated card of its own taped up in the break room, right next to the schedule board, so no new hire could say later that they hadn't known. Elena kept the photo of Mateo on her visor, even after she stopped needing the note taped underneath it. Some things you keep, not because you still need the reminder, but because of what the reminder cost you to earn in the first place. People think kindness is what you do when it's convenient, Elena said later, in the only interview she ever agreed to give, sitting in an office that was now, in a way she still found strange to say out loud, partly hers to help run. It's not. It's what you do when it costs you something real, and you do it anyway, without knowing if anyone will ever see it or pay it back. That night cost me a bonus I couldn't afford to lose. It ended up giving me back my whole life. If a story like Elena's has ever happened to you, a moment where doing the right thing cost you something before it gave you everything back, tell me about it in the comments below. I read every single one, and if you want more stories about quiet decency getting seen, even when nobody was ever supposed to be watching, subscribe and stay close. This is only the beginning of what people like Elena deserve to have told.